Do not applaud him, I told myself as the ballroom erupted in cheers. You are celebrating the wrong person. Nobody around me heard those words, yet they echoed louder than the orchestra filling the grand ballroom of the Sterling Grand Hotel in Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across polished marble floors while champagne glasses shimmered beneath them. Hundreds of executives, investors, politicians, and celebrities stood shoulder to shoulder, smiling for cameras that captured what everyone believed was another perfect chapter in Ryan Sterling's remarkable career. They saw success. They saw wealth. They saw a millionaire chief executive standing proudly beneath the company's enormous anniversary banner. What they did not see was the lie quietly standing beside him. And they certainly did not see the secret standing only 20 feet away, hidden beneath a white maternity gown and an 8-month pregnancy. My name is Victoria Bennett, and before that evening ended, one truth would quietly erase everything they thought they knew. Ryan stood on the stage dressed in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo, smiling with the confidence that had made magazine covers and business interviews effortless for years. In his arms rested a baby no older than 6 months, laughing innocently beneath the bright stage lights. Beside him stood Sabrina Cole in a breathtaking crimson evening gown, adjusting the child's tiny blanket while photographers eagerly captured every angle. Together they looked like the picture of a perfect family. The audience adored it. Some guests even wiped away happy tears. Then something happened that only I noticed. The baby reached toward Ryan's face with tiny fingers before softly saying one simple word. "Daddy." My heartbeat stopped for only a second, yet it felt long enough to separate the woman I had been from the woman I was about to become. The applause around me faded into meaningless echoes. A waiter walked past carrying silver trays of sparkling drinks. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed at a joke. Another investor praised Ryan's latest acquisition. Life continued exactly as it always had. Only mine had quietly fallen apart. I rested one trembling hand against my unborn child's gentle movements. Our daughter kicked softly as though reminding me she was still there. She had no idea that the future waiting for both of us had just changed forever. The strange part was that I was not surprised. Not completely. Months of late-night meetings. Weekend business trips that somehow never ended on schedule. Phone calls interrupted the moment I entered the room. Apologies delivered without eye contact. Every memory returned all at once, fitting together with painful precision like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to complete. Yet none of those discoveries frightened me as much as the thought that crossed my mind next. Ryan believed tonight belonged to him. He believed everyone in that ballroom admired the man who had built an empire through talent and determination. He had absolutely no idea the foundation beneath that empire had never truly belonged to him. A woman standing quietly among the guests lowered her champagne glass after recognizing me. She smiled politely, unaware that I could barely return the gesture. Around us, enormous digital screens replayed highlights from the company's history. Every achievement carried Ryan's face. Every milestone celebrated his leadership. Every speech praised his vision. Nobody questioned why another family name had quietly disappeared from the company's story years earlier. Nobody except me. My fingers slowly touched the wedding ring resting against my skin. I remembered the promise Ryan once made, that we would always stand beside each other no matter how difficult success became. Looking at the stage, I realized success had never been the problem. Silence had been. I slipped the ring from my finger and closed my hand around it. There would be no confrontation, no dramatic accusations, no desperate questions. Some truths deserve witnesses. Others deserve paperwork. I turned away from the celebration just as another burst of applause filled the ballroom behind me. The heavy doors opened, cool Manhattan night air brushed against my face, and for the first time in years I stopped walking behind my husband. Before sunrise, a single phone call would awaken people whose signatures carried more power than every camera, every investor, and every executive still celebrating inside. Ryan Sterling believed he owned the company. By tomorrow morning, the company itself would remind him who truly did. The limousine rolled silently through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan, while the city lights blurred across the tinted windows like fading memories. I never looked back at the hotel. There was nothing waiting for me inside except applause meant for someone who had already walked away from our marriage long before I walked away from that ballroom. My driver glanced into the rearview mirror only once before lowering his eyes again. He had driven me for almost 4 years. He knew when silence deserved respect. I rested one hand on my stomach while our daughter shifted gently beneath my heartbeat. The small movement steadied me. I was no longer making decisions only for myself. The Whitmore estate sat quietly beyond the northern edge of the city, hidden behind tall iron gates and ancient oak trees that had guarded my family's privacy for generations. Most people assumed I lived there simply because it had belonged to my late parents. They never asked why one of New York's oldest financial families had almost disappeared from public attention. My father had always believed real influence became stronger when nobody noticed it. He never chased magazine covers. He never accepted television interviews. He built companies the way master architects built foundations, knowing that the strongest structures were often the least visible. As I stepped inside the house, every room greeted me with the same quiet elegance I had known since childhood. The grandfather clock in the foyer marked 10 o'clock. The fireplace still carried the faint scent of cedar wood. Above the mantel hung my father's portrait, his calm expression unchanged by time. I paused beneath it longer than usual. For years I had questioned why he insisted I keep one particular promise after inheriting everything he left behind. Now I finally understood. My phone vibrated before I could remove my coat. The screen displayed one familiar name: Eleanor Brooks. She had served as our family's attorney since I graduated from college, and she was one of only a handful of people who knew the truth about my father's final business decisions. I answered immediately. "I watched the live coverage," Eleanor said softly. "I was hoping I would not receive your call tonight." I closed my eyes for a moment. Neither was I. She waited patiently. "Has the time finally come?" I looked once more toward my father's portrait before answering. "Yes." There was no surprise in her voice, only quiet understanding. "Everything has remained exactly as your father instructed. Nothing has changed." "Then activate every document," I replied, "including the shareholder notifications." "Understood." The call ended less than a minute later. No dramatic speeches, no emotional discussions, just one decision that had been waiting almost a decade to be made. Upstairs, I entered the nursery that had slowly taken shape over the past several months. Pale cream walls surrounded a white wooden crib positioned beside a large window overlooking the gardens. Folded baby blankets rested neatly inside woven baskets. A rocking chair waited in the corner beneath a shelf lined with children's books my mother had once read to me. I sat down carefully, resting both hands over my daughter as another gentle kick reminded me that hope still existed inside a day filled with disappointment. Downstairs, the first wave of confidential notifications began reaching destinations across New York. Independent board members received encrypted legal correspondence. Corporate counsel acknowledged emergency governance procedures. The lead auditing firm confirmed receipt of sealed ownership documentation. The chairman of the governance committee accepted a formal request for an extraordinary meeting before business hours the following morning. None of those messages mentioned my marriage. None mentioned Ryan. They addressed only one subject: the rights of the controlling shareholder. Meanwhile, across the city, laughter still echoed through the hotel ballroom where Ryan continued greeting investors and posing for photographs beside Sabrina. Reporters praised another successful anniversary celebration. Financial commentators predicted another record-breaking year under his leadership. Every headline prepared to celebrate the same familiar story. Nobody realized an entirely different story had already begun behind closed doors. I walked back downstairs carrying a small wooden box my father had given me on my 25th birthday. Inside rested a fountain pen, several handwritten letters, and one leather folder containing the original trust agreement bearing a signature I had not looked at in years. I placed the folder on my desk without opening it. I already knew what it contained. Before dawn, people who believed they understood the history of Sterling Global would begin discovering that its true history had never been written in newspapers, interviews, or annual reports. It had been quietly protected by one family, one promise, and one woman everyone had mistaken for nothing more than the wife of a successful man. Ryan Sterling woke just after 6 the next morning, believing the hardest part of the previous night had been entertaining investors for nearly 5 hours. He stretched, checked financial headlines on his phone, and smiled when the anniversary gala dominated every business website exactly as his communications team had predicted. Photographs showed him shaking hands with politicians, laughing beside international partners, and delivering another polished speech beneath the company's silver anniversary banner. None of the articles mentioned the woman who had quietly disappeared before dessert was served. None of them knew she had already set something far more significant into motion. His confidence lasted exactly 12 minutes. The first unexpected email arrived while he poured coffee into a porcelain mug overlooking the Manhattan skyline from his penthouse kitchen. The subject line read, "Extraordinary Governance Session." Before he finished reading the first paragraph, another notification appeared. Confidential shareholder review. Then another. Board attendance required. Legal confirmation requested. Ryan frowned. Emergency board meetings were rare, especially the morning after a successful corporate celebration. He immediately called his executive assistant. "Emily, why am I receiving governance notices before sunrise?" Papers shuffled on the other end of the call. "I was just about to contact you, sir." The governance committee instructed every director and executive officer to report to headquarters by 9 o'clock. Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter. Who authorized the meeting? Emily hesitated. The request came from the controlling shareholder. Ryan laughed softly. Then someone sent the wrong paperwork. I am the controlling shareholder. Another pause followed. Legal asked me not to discuss details over the phone. The line disconnected, leaving Ryan staring at the city beyond the glass walls of his apartment. For the first time in years, uncertainty replaced routine. Across the city, Victoria was already awake. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Whitmore Estate Library where Eleanor Brooks carefully arranged leather-bound folders across the polished walnut desk. Each folder contained certified ownership records, trust agreements, historical share transfers, and original corporate resolutions preserved for years without public attention. Victoria entered wearing a simple cream maternity dress beneath a tailored beige coat, her expression peaceful despite the weight of the day ahead. Eleanor looked up with a reassuring smile. Everything has been verified 3 separate times. Victoria nodded. No mistakes. None. Eleanor opened the largest folder. Every signature matches the original filings. Every transfer was properly recorded. Every trust provision remains enforceable. Your father left nothing to chance. Victoria gently touched the worn leather cover before closing it again. He always planned farther ahead than anyone else. Eleanor smiled quietly, including Ryan. Meanwhile, Sterling Global Headquarters buzzed with unusual tension long before the official workday began. Receptionists whispered behind polished marble desks. Security officers watched unfamiliar legal representatives entering the executive floor with sealed document cases. Senior vice presidents abandoned casual conversations the moment Ryan stepped through the revolving front entrance. Normally, employees greeted him with confident smiles and friendly remarks. This morning, many simply nodded politely before looking away. He noticed immediately. Inside the executive elevator, he checked his reflection, wondering if exhaustion from the previous night's celebration somehow showed on his face. Everything appeared exactly the same. Yet the atmosphere around him had changed completely. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Chief Financial Officer Daniel Mercer approached carrying a thick legal binder instead of his usual tablet computer. "Good morning," Ryan said. Daniel answered with an uneasy smile. "Morning." Ryan gestured toward the binder. "Do you know what this meeting is really about?" Daniel carefully adjusted the folder beneath his arm. "I know only what legal authorized me to know." Ryan frowned. "Since when does legal keep information from the chief executive officer?" Daniel chose his next words carefully. "Since the request came directly from the controlling shareholder." Ryan watched him walk away before repeating the phrase quietly to himself. The controlling shareholder. Something about those words unsettled him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Minutes later, he entered the executive conference room expecting answers. Instead, he found every place setting already prepared, every board packet sealed, and one unfamiliar leather portfolio resting in the chair opposite his own. Embossed in gold across its cover appeared a family crest he had seen only a handful of times during his marriage. The Whitmore crest. Ryan stared at it for several silent seconds before a memory surfaced from years earlier. Jonathan Whitmore had once smiled across a dinner table and said, "The strongest owners are usually the ones nobody notices." At the time, Ryan assumed it was simply another lesson about modesty. This morning, For the very first time, he began wondering whether Jonathan had been talking about something entirely different. The executive boardroom on the 42nd floor had always felt like Ryan Sterling's kingdom. Every major acquisition had been approved inside these walls. Every ambitious expansion had begun around this polished walnut table. The city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows had always reminded him how far he had climbed. This morning, however, something felt different the moment he stepped inside. Conversations stopped almost instantly. Board members who normally greeted him with relaxed confidence offered only brief nods before returning their attention to thick legal binders placed neatly before every seat. Outside council occupied chairs usually reserved for senior executives. Representatives from the company's independent auditing firm quietly reviewed documents without exchanging unnecessary words. Even the coffee served that morning remained untouched. Ryan looked toward Daniel Mercer. What exactly is happening? Daniel adjusted his glasses, but never answered. Instead, the general counsel stood and addressed the room. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This extraordinary session has been convened under Article 8 of the Sterling Global Corporate Governance Charter. Ryan frowned. I have not authorized any extraordinary session. The attorney met his eyes calmly. Respectfully, this meeting did not require your authorization. A quiet silence settled across the room. The words carried no hostility, only legal certainty. Ryan slowly took his seat while the board secretary distributed sealed envelopes to every director. Each envelope contained the same collection of certified documents bearing embossed corporate seals. Ryan opened his immediately. The first page displayed a single heading in bold letters. Notice of controlling shareholder review. His expression tightened. This cannot be correct, he said. There has to be some administrative mistake. The general counsel calmly opened another folder. There is no mistake, Mr. Sterling. He placed several original corporate filings on the table where every board member could clearly see them. These documents have remained in secure legal custody for more than 15 years. Ryan leaned forward. 15 years? Yes. One elderly director, Margaret Holloway, quietly folded her hands before speaking. She had served on the board since before Ryan became chief executive officer and rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary. Jonathan Whitmore instructed every member of this board to preserve these records until his daughter personally chose to exercise her rights. Ryan turned toward her in disbelief. Victoria? Margaret nodded gently. Victoria. The room remained perfectly still. Ryan looked back down at the documents spread before him. Share transfer certificates. Trust agreements. Historical ownership records. Independent legal certifications. Every page appeared authentic. Every signature had been notarized years earlier. Every filing carried official registration numbers. He searched desperately for something that would expose an error, but nothing appeared out of place. The general counsel carefully turned another page. Mr. Sterling, your employment agreement has always identified your position as chief executive officer appointed by the controlling shareholder through the Whitmore Family Trust. Ryan stared at him without speaking. He remembered signing hundreds of pages during the company's early expansion years. Jonathan Whitmore had laughed and joked that lawyers always filled contracts with unnecessary language. Ryan had signed every document confidently without imagining that one overlooked paragraph could redefine everything he believed about his career. Across town, Victoria quietly entered a private executive conference room inside the Whitmore family office accompanied by Eleanor Brooks. Unlike the modern luxury of Sterling Global headquarters, this room reflected understated elegance. Rich oak shelves lined the walls. Historical company ledgers rested inside glass cabinets. Family photographs stood beside framed business licenses dating back decades. Eleanor placed one final leather portfolio before Victoria. The board has already begun reviewing the original ownership records, she said softly. Victoria nodded, but did not immediately open the folder. Instead, she looked toward the large window overlooking the autumn gardens. My father always believed truth should arrive quietly, she whispered. Eleanor smiled. Then today is exactly the day he prepared you for. Back inside Sterling Global headquarters, another sealed document reached every director. The board secretary stood before the room and spoke with measured professionalism. The next agenda item concerns the formal appearance of the controlling shareholder. Ryan slowly lifted his eyes from the paperwork. Victoria is coming here? The general counsel answered without hesitation. She has accepted the board's invitation. Ryan glanced toward the empty chair positioned at the head of the conference table. For years he had assumed that seat belonged to whoever carried the title of Chief Executive Officer. Only now did he notice the polished brass nameplate resting quietly before it. It did not display his name. It simply read, Chairwoman. And for the first time since entering the room, Ryan realized that the chair he had always believed was waiting for him had never truly been his at all. The executive boardroom remained perfectly still after the agenda was announced. Nobody reached for the coffee. Nobody shuffled papers. Even the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed strangely motionless beneath the gray Manhattan sky. Ryan Sterling sat quietly, staring at the polished brass nameplate resting at the head of the conference table. Chairwoman. One simple word had unsettled him more than every legal document placed before him that morning. The board secretary glanced toward the entrance as the clock quietly reached 10 o'clock. A gentle knock echoed through the room. Every conversation immediately disappeared. The heavy walnut doors opened. Victoria Bennett stepped inside with calm, measured confidence. She wore an elegant ivory maternity business suit tailored perfectly around her 8-month pregnancy. One hand rested naturally beneath her baby bump, while the other carried a slim leather portfolio. There was no dramatic entrance, no security detail, no public announcement. Yet the room responded instinctively. Margaret Holloway rose first. Daniel Mercer stood immediately afterward. Then every director, attorney, auditor, and executive followed until the entire boardroom was standing in respectful silence. Ryan remained seated for one brief moment before slowly rising as well, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and growing realization. Victoria acknowledged the room with a gentle nod. Good morning, she said softly. Please, everyone have a seat. Her voice was calm, warm, and completely free of bitterness. She walked toward the chair at the head of the table with quiet confidence, placing her leather portfolio beside the polished brass nameplate before taking her seat. Only then did everyone else sit down. Ryan watched the scene unfold as though he had stepped into someone else's company. The general counsel carefully adjusted his glasses before speaking. Madam Chairwoman, thank you for attending. Victoria smiled politely. Thank you for arranging today's meeting. Ryan finally broke the silence. Victoria? She turned toward him with composed eyes. Good morning, Ryan. There was no anger in her voice. No accusation. Only quiet distance. That calmness unsettled him even more than confrontation would have. Eleanor Brooks entered moments later carrying a secured document case, followed by 2 senior attorneys from the Whitmore family office. The legal team placed several certified folders neatly across the conference table before opening the first binder. Every movement reflected careful preparation rather than theatrical presentation. Eleanor addressed the board. The documents before you include the original trust agreements executed 15 years ago, subsequent ownership confirmations, certified corporate filings, and annual compliance audits. Each document has been independently verified and remains fully enforceable. One by one, she displayed the original certificates beneath a document camera connected to the large presentation screen. Official seals appeared clearly. Registration numbers matched archived corporate records. Historical signatures remained perfectly preserved. Ryan recognized Jonathan Whitmore's handwriting almost immediately. His father-in-law had personally signed every foundational document transferring controlling ownership into Victoria's trust years before their marriage. Ryan leaned back slowly, struggling to reconcile the truth with everything he believed about his career. Margaret Holloway quietly folded her hands together. Jonathan asked us to protect these records until Victoria believed the time was right. We honored that promise. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly before speaking. My father believed leadership should always be earned before ownership was revealed. She gently rested her hand over the portfolio. He wanted every executive to be judged by character, not by how they behaved around inherited power. Daniel Mercer looked toward Victoria with genuine respect. Most employees never knew any of this. Victoria nodded. That was intentional. Ryan finally spoke again. Why did you never tell me? She met his eyes steadily. Because I wanted someone to love the woman, not the family behind her. The silence that followed felt heavier than any legal argument presented that morning. No one interrupted. No one looked away. Every person in the room understood that the conversation had quietly moved beyond corporate ownership into something far more personal. Eleanor reached into the document case one final time and carefully removed a sealed ivory envelope bearing the embossed Whitmore family crest. She placed it gently in front of Victoria. Your father instructed that this letter remain sealed unless you personally chose to step forward as controlling shareholder. Victoria rested her fingertips lightly against the unopened envelope, taking one slow breath before looking around the room. I have carried this letter for nearly 10 years, she said quietly. Today will be the first time anyone, including me, hears what my father wanted us to remember. Every eye turned toward the sealed envelope as Victoria carefully broke the wax seal, unaware that the words waiting inside would change not only the future of Sterling Global, but the way everyone in that room understood leadership forever. Victoria unfolded the letter with careful hands, the faint sound of old paper echoing through the silent boardroom. The handwriting was unmistakable. Every elegant stroke belonged to Jonathan Whitmore, written only weeks before his passing nearly 10 years earlier. Victoria paused for a brief moment before beginning to read. My dearest Victoria, if you are opening this letter today, then life has presented you with a decision I always hoped you would never have to make. That means the responsibility I protected for you can no longer remain hidden. Nobody moved. Every director, attorney, and executive remained completely still. Even Ryan seemed to forget where he was as Victoria continued. You were never given this company because of our family name. You were entrusted with it because you understand something many successful people never learn. Ownership is not about control. It is about stewardship. Wealth is not measured by what you possess. It is measured by what remains stronger after you leave. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly before continuing with a voice that remained steady despite the emotion rising inside her. One day, people may mistake confidence for wisdom, popularity for leadership, and ambition for character. If that day ever comes, remember that your responsibility is not to protect anyone's pride. Your responsibility is to protect every employee who depends upon this company for their future. Several board members quietly nodded. Margaret Holloway removed her glasses, gently wiping away tears that had begun gathering in her eyes. Jonathan Whitmore had been more than a businessman to many people in the room. He had been a mentor whose principles shaped an entire generation of leaders. Victoria reached the final page. If the person leading this company forgets that titles are borrowed while integrity is earned, then you must act without anger and without revenge. Lead with calm judgment. Never destroy a life simply because you have the power to do so. Justice is strongest when it never needs to raise its voice. The final sentence rested alone beneath his signature. I have always trusted your heart more than my own experience. Victoria carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope before placing both hands gently upon the conference table. The room remained silent for several long seconds. Nobody attempted to speak first. Finally, Margaret looked toward Victoria. Your father would be proud of the woman you became. Victoria smiled softly. Everything I know about leadership came from watching him quietly keep his promises. She slowly turned toward Ryan. His confident posture had disappeared. Instead, he sat motionless, studying the same polished table where countless corporate victories had once made him feel invincible. Ryan, Victoria said gently, I did not ask for this meeting because of what happened at the gala. He looked up, surprised. You did not. She slowly shook her head. No. Last night only showed me that our marriage had already reached its end. Today's meeting exists because Sterling Global deserves complete transparency about its future. Her words carried neither accusation nor bitterness. They sounded like the conclusion of a decision reached long before the previous evening. Daniel Mercer quietly pushed a financial report toward Victoria. She reviewed the numbers carefully before asking detailed questions regarding employee retirement plans, manufacturing investments, research funding, and long-term debt strategy. Every answer she requested reflected deep familiarity with the company's operations. Ryan watched in growing disbelief. During countless dinners over the years, Victoria had occasionally asked thoughtful questions about company projects. He had always assumed she was simply being supportive. Only now did he understand she had already known far more than she ever revealed. The General Counsel finally addressed the board. Madam Chairwoman, with your permission, The final governance item is ready for consideration. Victoria nodded once. Please proceed. The secretary distributed identical voting packets to every director around the table. Each packet contained only one resolution concerning executive leadership and corporate governance. Pens were placed neatly beside every ballot. The room grew even quieter than before. No debates remained. No additional evidence was necessary. Everything required for the decision had already been presented. Ryan slowly looked around the room, meeting familiar faces that had worked beside him for years. None appeared hostile. None looked triumphant. Instead, he saw thoughtful people preparing to fulfill the responsibility entrusted to them. The secretary stood beside the conference table and spoke calmly. Members of the board of directors, you may now cast your votes. One by one, directors reached for their pens, knowing that within only a few minutes the future leadership of Sterling Global would no longer be decided by reputation, public image, or personal ambition, but by the quiet judgment of those entrusted to protect the company above every individual. The board secretary collected the completed ballots one by one, placing each folded voting card into a polished mahogany box positioned at the center of the conference table. No one rushed the process. Every director understood that the decision they were making would become part of the company's history for decades to come. The only sound inside the room came from the quiet rustle of paper and the distant hum of Manhattan traffic beyond the glass walls. Ryan Sterling remained perfectly still, his hands resting together on the table where he had signed countless contracts over the years. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, he realized there was nothing left to persuade, negotiate, or explain. The decision no longer belonged to him. After the final ballot was placed inside the box, the general counsel opened it in full view of everyone present. Together with two independent auditors, he verified every vote before handing the official tally to Margaret Holloway. She adjusted her glasses and carefully reviewed the document in silence. Every pair of eyes remained fixed upon her. Finally, she looked up. The resolution has passed, she announced with quiet professionalism. Effective immediately, the board of directors has approved the transition of executive leadership in accordance with the governing documents of Sterling Global. No applause followed. No celebration interrupted the announcement. The directors simply accepted the outcome with respectful composure, fully aware that moments of genuine consequence rarely required dramatic reactions. Ryan slowly lowered his eyes and released a measured breath. He had imagined many endings throughout his career. None of them resembled this one. He had expected resistance if he ever lost power. He had expected arguments, headlines, accusations, perhaps even public embarrassment. Instead, everything had unfolded through orderly procedure, legal clarity, and calm professionalism. Victoria remained seated for another moment before standing gracefully. Pregnancy had slowed her movements slightly, but nothing diminished the confidence in her posture. Thank you, she said quietly to the board. I appreciate the care each of you has shown throughout this process. She looked toward the directors one by one before continuing. Please allow the official minutes to reflect that today's decision is based entirely upon the governance responsibilities established by the Whitmore Family Trust and the Sterling Global Charter. This meeting was never intended to resolve personal matters. Several directors nodded in agreement. Victoria continued with the same calm tone. Ryan has devoted many years to this company. Under his leadership, Sterling Global achieved meaningful growth, expanded internationally, and created opportunities for thousands of employees. Those accomplishments deserve to remain part of our history. Ryan slowly lifted his head. Surprise briefly crossed his face. He had expected criticism. Instead, she had chosen fairness. Eleanor Brooks quietly placed another folder before Victoria. Inside rested the formal transition agreement prepared in advance by corporate counsel. Victoria opened it carefully. This agreement provides full contractual compensation, continued executive benefits required under existing employment provisions, and a structured leadership transition designed to protect every employee, shareholder, and client. Daniel Mercer reviewed the document before speaking. Finance has verified every provision. The general counsel nodded. Legal has completed its review as well. Victoria reached for her father's fountain pen resting beside the agreement. The room watched silently as she signed the final authorization with slow, deliberate confidence. The sound of ink moving across paper seemed almost symbolic, closing one chapter while opening another. She then gently slid the agreement toward Ryan. He looked at the document for several seconds before accepting the pen. Countless memories passed through his mind in that quiet moment. The first day Jonathan Whitmore welcomed him into the company. The evening he proposed to Victoria. The promises they once believed would last forever. Without speaking, he signed the acknowledgement confirming receipt of the board's decision. The transition became official the instant his signature touched the page. Outside the executive boardroom, carefully prepared internal announcements reached every department simultaneously. Employees received messages assuring them that daily operations would continue without interruption. Investors received confirmation that the transition had been unanimously approved under long-standing governance procedures. Financial markets remained stable because uncertainty had been replaced with transparency. Victoria closed the final folder before looking once more around the table. Sterling Global was never built around one person, she said softly. It was built around trust. Our responsibility now is to protect that trust for everyone who depends upon this company. The directors quietly rose from their seats, not because a meeting had ended, but because a new chapter had begun under the leadership of the woman they had quietly protected for years, while Ryan understood that the greatest opportunity he had ever been given had never truly been the position he had just lost. It had been the remarkable woman whose quiet strength he had failed to recognize until it was far too late. The news spread through Sterling Global faster than anyone expected, yet the reaction inside headquarters was nothing like the chaos financial reporters loved to predict. Employees did not gather in frightened crowds. Phones did not ring with panic. Instead, managers calmly received detailed transition plans that had already been prepared weeks in advance. Every department received the same message. Daily operations would continue without interruption. Payroll remained secure. Existing projects would move forward exactly as scheduled. The company had not entered a crisis. It had entered a new chapter. Victoria spent the remainder of the afternoon walking through departments she had quietly supported for years without anyone realizing the extent of her involvement. She stopped inside the engineering division where several young designers looked surprised to see her. She greeted each employee by name. Many recognized her from scholarship ceremonies, employee family picnics, and community volunteer programs. They had always assumed she simply enjoyed charitable work. None of them knew those programs had existed because she personally approved their funding every year. In the research laboratory, an elderly technician approached with uncertain eyes. "Congratulations, Madam Chairwoman," he said respectfully. Victoria smiled warmly before gently shaking her head. "Please keep calling me Victoria." The technician laughed softly. "Your father used to say exactly the same thing." She smiled without answering. Some traditions deserved to continue. Across the executive floor, Ryan quietly packed the few personal items that had remained in his office despite more than a decade of leadership. A framed wedding photograph rested near the corner of his desk. He stared at it for several seconds before carefully placing it inside a storage box. The picture showed two people smiling beneath bright summer sunlight, believing trust would always be enough. Ryan realized he could remember every detail of that day except the moment he had slowly stopped protecting what mattered most. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Daniel Mercer stepped inside, carrying 2 coffee cups. "Mind if I come in?" Ryan nodded. Daniel placed 1 cup on the desk before sitting opposite him. For several quiet moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I want you to know something." Ryan looked up. "No one here celebrates another person's disappointment." Ryan managed a faint smile. "Thank you." Daniel glanced toward the empty office around them. "The board respected your work. That never changed." Ryan lowered his eyes. "I wish I had understood sooner that respect and ownership are not the same thing." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Neither are success and wisdom." They finished their coffee without discussing legal documents, board votes, or corporate titles again. Outside the office windows, employees continued moving confidently through another ordinary workday because stability had quietly replaced uncertainty. Late that afternoon, Victoria entered the executive office that now belonged to the chairwoman. Nothing inside had been dramatically redesigned. She had specifically instructed the facilities team not to remove every trace of the previous leadership. History deserved honesty, not erasure. The only visible change stood behind the desk where a new framed statement displayed one sentence from Jonathan Whitmore's final letter. Leadership is measured by the people who grow because of your decisions. Victoria paused before the frame, reading the words once more. Eleanor Brooks entered carrying a folder containing several community investment proposals awaiting approval. Your schedule tomorrow is already full, she said with a gentle smile. Employee pension review at 9. Scholarship Foundation meeting at 11. Manufacturing expansion at 1. Children's Hospital Partnership at 3. Victoria accepted the folder. Good. Eleanor looked at her with quiet curiosity. No media interviews? Victoria shook her head. The company has listened to enough speeches. Right now it needs work. Eleanor smiled knowingly before leaving the office. As evening settled across Manhattan, Ryan exited the headquarters through a private side entrance carrying a single storage box. No reporters waited outside. No cameras followed him. Only cool autumn air greeted the end of a chapter he had once believed would never close. At the front entrance, another black sedan quietly arrived. Victoria stepped outside after finishing her final meeting of the day. Their eyes met across the sidewalk for only a brief moment. Neither walked toward the other. Neither spoke. Nothing meaningful remained to argue. Ryan gave a small respectful nod before entering his waiting car. Victoria returned the gesture with quiet kindness. As the two vehicles departed in opposite directions beneath the glowing city lights, Sterling Global remained exactly where it had always stood. The buildings had not changed. The employees had not changed. Only the person entrusted with protecting all of them had finally stepped out of the shadows and into the place where she had quietly belonged all along. 1 year later, the morning sun rose over the Pacific coastline, casting a warm golden glow across Sterling Global's breathtaking new headquarters overlooking the California Ocean. The glass towers reflected the waves below while hundreds of employees, international investors, community leaders, and business partners gathered outside for the official dedication ceremony. White banners moved gently in the coastal breeze, and a simple orchestra played quietly as guests found their seats beneath the open sky. Unlike the extravagant anniversary gala from the year before, this celebration was not centered around one executive. It honored everyone whose work had helped build the company together. Victoria Bennett stepped onto the stage wearing a beautifully tailored white business suit, her confidence now effortless rather than hidden. Resting comfortably in her arms was her 8-month-old daughter, Olivia, smiling curiously at the crowd while reaching toward the sunlight dancing across the ocean. The audience responded with warm applause, not because they admired wealth, but because they respected the woman who had quietly transformed the company without sacrificing its values. Behind her, the enormous Sterling Global logo overlooked a campus that now included employee childcare facilities, expanded research laboratories, scholarship centers, and a medical wellness complex available to every member of the company's workforce. During the previous 12 months, employee satisfaction reached the highest level in company history. Staff retention exceeded every projection. New parental leave policies became a national example of responsible leadership. Educational grants doubled. Community partnerships expanded into neighborhoods that had long been overlooked. Financial analysts praised the company's consistent growth, but employees spoke about something far more meaningful. They finally believed the people leading the company genuinely cared about the people working inside it. Reporters frequently requested exclusive interviews, hoping Victoria would discuss the dramatic boardroom meeting that had changed the company's future. She politely declined nearly every invitation. When one respected business journalist eventually asked how she managed to remain calm through such extraordinary circumstances, she smiled gently before answering with only one sentence. Leadership becomes meaningful the moment people stop working for your success and start believing you are working for theirs. That single statement appeared in newspapers, business magazines, and leadership conferences across the country. It became one of the most quoted executive interviews of the year. Meanwhile, Ryan Sterling had quietly built a very different life. He no longer occupied magazine covers or spoke at international business summits. Instead, he accepted advisory work with several nonprofit organizations helping young entrepreneurs avoid the mistakes he now understood all too well. His apartment overlooked a small neighborhood park instead of the Manhattan skyline. Most mornings he walked there carrying coffee and a notebook rather than financial reports and acquisition proposals. Success no longer meant recognition. It meant becoming the kind of person he once believed he already was. On the afternoon of the headquarters dedication, Ryan stood quietly beyond the security perimeter with several invited community guests. No one forced him to stay outside. He chose that place himself. From there, he watched Victoria welcome employees one by one, stopping to speak with maintenance workers, engineers, receptionists, security officers, and interns with exactly the same warmth she showed international investors. Olivia laughed happily in her mother's arms as the ocean breeze carried the sound across the courtyard. Ryan smiled softly, not because the moment belonged to him, but because he finally understood what genuine leadership looked like. Nearby, Margaret Holloway joined Victoria after the ceremony concluded. She looked across the campus filled with employees and families enjoying the celebration together. "Your father dreamed of this place," she said quietly. Victoria looked toward the sea before answering. "He dreamed that one day people would remember how they were treated long after they forgot who held the biggest office." Margaret gently touched Olivia's tiny hand. "I think he would be proud." Victoria smiled, watching her daughter gaze curiously at the endless horizon stretching beyond the company her grandfather had entrusted to her care. As the sun slowly settled toward the Pacific, golden light covered the headquarters in a peaceful glow while laughter echoed across the campus. Ryan quietly turned and walked away without bitterness, carrying with him lessons that no title could ever teach. Victoria remained surrounded by the people whose future she had promised to protect, knowing the greatest inheritance she would one day leave her daughter would never be measured in buildings, shares, or wealth. It would be the courage to choose integrity when silence seemed easier, the wisdom to protect people before pride, and the quiet strength to remember that the true value of a remarkable woman is often discovered only after someone mistakes her kindness for weakness.